All right. Well, good evening and welcome to another production of Sefer Academy, courtesy of Sefer Publishing Group, www.sefer.net. I'm Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. I'm hanging out with you tonight on Thursday evening, and hopefully we're going to have a great discussion tonight. I'm praying for a great discussion anyway, over the topic of the Mishkan, the pattern of the temple. And I have to tell you, this has been a very interesting program. Yeah, yes, indeed. And a very interesting study. And we're going to get into it a little bit tonight and talk about it. Now, unfortunately, I talked about a lot of things in the trailer to this program. I don't know how much we're going to be able to talk about, but let's get into that initially, and we'll talk about that before we get into the PowerPoint. You know, much of the discussion in the prophetic community today concerns the ominous idea of a third temple being built. You know, we hear this quite a bit. Well, that's when they're going to build the third temple. Well, the third temple is about to be constructed. Well, the covenant with the many has been entered into, so the third temple can be built, and the third temple is going up. Well, that somehow the sealed and cryptic prophecies of Daniy'el might come to be revealed in our time. How often we have heard that a third temple would be built, and that an antichrist would declare himself to be God within its walls, setting himself up as the abomination of desolation. I mean, I've heard about it a lot. I can remember when Hal Lindsey published his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, when this became a very popular notion nationwide in the United States. But in this narrative, there is little said concerning the original house of the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabernacle, or in the Ivriyt, the Mishkan. The Mishkan, in its simplistic glory, meant so much more than mere legalism, but rather was established as the very seat of authority of Yahuah. This authority was given under a set of artifacts to be constructed in a pattern specified by Yahuah himself, and projected a concept, yea, even a mindset concerning the Torah of Yahuah. Surprisingly, we see in the modern narrative an impetus to link the tabernacle of Yahuah, the Mishkan, to the temple of his name, the Heikel. Now, I didn't have a lot of time to talk about the aspect of what took place with the constructing of the Heikel. So let's spend a little bit of time with it here, because we're going to see something that is really quite interesting. One thing that we note when we talk about the building of the tabernacle is that the tabernacle was constructed as basically a glorified tent. It was a glorified tent. I mean, you had essentially, although there were boards put up to create the walls of the temple, I think it was just put on earth, quite frankly, or the tabernacle, and then it was overlaid initially with linen, and then from the linen came the furs that they put on top of it. So this was basically a tent. It was a tent. It was not a stone edifice. Now let's compare the difference when we talk about the difference between this tent, which was specifically instructed to Moshe. Moshe, you shall build it this way with exactitude, and compared to what Solomon was given. Now, David was told by the prophet Nathan, well, you are going to build a house for me, not for a house for Yahuah, but a house for his name. The temple was going to be a place for his name, a house for his name. And as we review this, we have to be able to distinguish very clearly between this tabernacle that was established in the wilderness and a tabernacle that was going to be put up and then taken down and moved. And ultimately we end up at Shiloh, or Shiloh, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but Shiloh in the land of Canaan. And then this is transformed and moved. I mean, David, for one, moves the Ark of the Covenant, and he has problems with it. So did the Pelishtim have problems with the Ark of the Covenant when they wrongfully seized it for a while. But David has problems with it too, and so did the priests moving it. But there's a reason why. We're going to discover the reason why these priests had problems moving the Ark of the Covenant. But we know some very interesting things. Let's take a look at some of these premises. We know that, for instance, that the discussion was put up these boards made of shittim wood and cover them with linen first, and then cover them with furs. Cover them with furs. Okay, you're supposed to cover them with furs. And this is supposed to be on a suspended thing that has these beams in there and pillars, and it's going to have a veil, certain curtains and so forth. but with very specific things. You're going to have this in here, you're going to have that in there, you're going to have this in here, you're not going to have anything else in here. And yet, when we get to Solomon, all of a sudden it's, no, we're not going to use fur anymore, and we're not going to use linen anymore, and we're really not even going to use the shittim wood boards for the side. We're going to instead build with stone. We're going to have our friend up here, Hiram, up in Lebanon, the king of Tyre, we're going to have him build us a temple of stone and cedar timbers, right? The cedars of Lebanon. And this was a big problem for Solomon because Solomon was not a builder. Solomon had a group of priests around him. They weren't builders at all. And so even though David had made most of the purchasing, he bought most of the supplies, Solomon could not do it. And he talked to Hiram and he said, okay, first of all, can you bring down the cut stones, that are out of line from there in southern Lebanon and northern Israel? Bring those down. And then can you bring down the cedar timbers? And so Hiram was like, yeah, we'll bring them down. Just have your guys pick them up at the port of Jaffa. We're going to drop them off FOB Jaffa. Well, Solomon didn't even have the people who could even haul it up from Jaffa. So he tells Hiram, look, would you haul it up? And could you guys actually build the temple? And Hiram says, yeah, I'll build the temple for you. I'll build the temple for you for 22 cities. You give me control of 22 cities up here around my port city of Tyre. And yeah, we'll build the temple for you. And Solomon says, that's a done deal. So Hiram does it, builds the temple in the palace of Solomon. And Solomon short shirts him on the 22 cities. Instead of 22 cities, he gives him 22, basically tent encampments, single, so one post office kind of places. And so here he was, boom. Hiram felt very, very ripped off by Solomon over this. And it was one of the impetus behind the civil war that would take place under his son, Rehoboam. And so what you see is that this temple was constructed, and it was constructed not as the tabernacle, but as a temple for the name of Yahuah. Big difference. Now, even though they had a lot of similarities in terms of how the temple was built, it was not the exactitude required by Yah. Yah said, build it this way with exactitude. And there was a reason why it was to be built that way. Now, we're going to see that when we go out of this first temple into the second temple, well, here, let me just continue on. Let me say that there is no link that goes without definition or description comparing the Mishkan to the Heikel. It is assumed that the two are one and the same, but they are not. Equally true is the disentanglement and dispossession between Solomon's temple, which housed the Ark of the Covenant, and the Beit Heikel, or the second temple, which did not house the Ark of the Covenant. Little is known concerning the second temple, as the books which discuss this epoch, the 400 years which preceded the first advent of Mashiach, have been relegated to the status of merely historic books, which cannot be considered inspired or even relevant for that matter. So we don't read 3 Esdras or 4 Esdras, which in the Sefer is 3 Ezra and 4 Ezra. We don't read Maccabees 1 through 4. We don't read the other historic literature that followed the book of Malachi, telling us about what happened in the second temple. So neither is there any inquiry in respect of the 70 sequestered texts reconstructed by Ezra. I mean, this is because people don't read 4 Ezra. They don't know that Ezra sequestered 70 books, and that these 70 books were held at the temple in Jerusalem, also held at the library in Alexandria, and held in 3 other places besides. There were 5 libraries holding the 70 texts that no one can read. We're not allowed to. Oh, you're not allowed to read those. Why aren't we allowed to read those? Because I put my pants on both legs at the same time, and you put your pants on one leg at a time. Therefore, I'm telling you, I've read them, you don't get to. I can read them, you can't. Well, actually, there's many books that have gone undiscovered. This is why we see a huge topic of the lost books of the Bible. Because there are many, many lost books. There are books that are specifically named. They're specifically named in the text. The book of Jasher, for instance, named twice. We have the book of Edo, the book of Nathan, the book of Wars. There's a number of books that are simply just are named inside of Scripture, and they don't appear, or you can't find them. And so there have been a number of people who have, proffered various texts saying, well, this is the true book of Elijah or the true book of Edo. I'm not so sure they are. We have to look at all these things very carefully. But the list of the 70 include texts you may not recognize, like 5 Maccabees and 4 and 5 Baruch and the book of Jason and other books. These books are books that were contained in this group of 70 that were likely the 70 books that were intended by the name Septuagint. Because Septuagint does not describe Septuagint and the 72 so-called translators, but rather makes the claim that we have 70 books, but it doesn't contain 70 books. So why are you calling it Septuagint? Because it was intended to contain 70 books, namely the lost 70, and it didn't have them. It didn't have them. And when the Romans found out about the lost 70 books, they went nuts and they started burning every library they could find. Burn that library to the ground. Burn it again and burn it again. They burned Alexandria 3 times trying to make sure that they got the 70 books, because you can't rewrite history unless you kill the history that preceded it. Okay? All right. But when was the second temple completed? Well, this is given to us in 3 Ezra, chapter 8. What was its location in respect of Solomon's temple? Was it built directly on top of Solomon's temple? No, no one ever claims that. Did it remain in practice since there was no ark? Well, here's a big question. When you see no Ark of the Covenant, when you talk about the tabernacle, the essential function of the tabernacle was the Ark of the Covenant. That was its centerpiece. That is where Yah said, I will commune with you from this mercy seat. So when there's no Ark of the Covenant in the second temple, what's going on there? What's going on there is ritual. And that's all that's going on there is ritual. And so you had the ritual of, well, let's do the sacrifice practices. Let's do this. Let's do the Levitical practices. Let's have this. But did they? And for how long? We have a record inside of 3 Ezra that is very interesting because it talks about a specific year of Darius when the temple was completed. Now, most secular historians who have no problem reading First Esdras, or what we call 3 Ezra, they have no problem reading that at all. They read it and they look at it and they compare it to the historical record and they go, we can conclude that the second temple was completed, not begun, but completed in the year 417 BC. In the year 417 BC. Okay, so in 417 now, you're going to have this record that's going to take us up to really 3 BC, which is this non-existent record of the time period that happens between the construction of the second temple and when Mashiach arrives. Let's talk about some of that. Number one, we know that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there because Jeremiah had buried the Ark of the Covenant somewhere and was not to be found after the Babylonian captivity. Number two, we know that the kingdom of Yahud was never recreated. Even in the second temple period, they tried to have a discrete city of Jerusalem, but even that was not autonomous. It always came under the ruling authorities of the land, whoever that may have been, until you get to the point of Alexander the Great's conquest of the whole land. And when Alexander the Great takes over and immediately dies, and it's broken into 4 kingdoms, the Seleucid kingdom begins to rule over this area. And Greekism, the Hellenistic lifestyle, was imposed on what used to be the second temple, which was essentially only a building used for rituals, which may or may not have appeared like the first temple. There was nobody living that could look at the temple and say, I remember the first temple. First temple was destroyed in 586 BC. The second temple wasn't finished until 417 BC. That's a lot of years. So what you see there is that nobody could remember. And here you had the second temple that was so indiscreet, it was being used as a warehouse, being used like this. And then when the Greeks got there, they converted the outer court into a gymnasium. Now, a gymnasium under the Greeks was a time of, nude games that were taking place while they practiced throwing the discus and the shot put and the javelin, right? It was a gymnasium. The gymnasium was actually quite offensive to the idea and remains offensive to the ideas of Judaism today. And it was very offensive to the people of the Torah at the time. In addition to doing a gymnasium outside in the outer court, they installed the statue of Jupiter in the inner court and began to sacrifice pork on the uncut stone of the altar. Now, because of this, this litany is described in the books of the Maccabees. Now, some people come out and say the books of the Maccabees are false. Well, it's interesting that the books of the Maccabees, by the way, which were canonized as Deuterocanon by the Catholic Church, and which appeared in all of the early English texts, including the Coverdale, including the Geneva, including the KJV, AV, and its subsequent progeny, all the way through the 1789 Benjamin Blaney and even the 1834 Brown. These books have somehow become false in the modern narrative because somebody's figured out the prophecy of Daniel, or so they believe. But the book of the Maccabees relates and tells us a story of the Greeks establishing a secular philosophy in the Holy Land, sacrificing pork on the altar, the uncut stone inside the Second Temple. But nobody says anything about finding the Ark of the Covenant, about inside the Holy of Holies. That's not there. It's just the ritual. And so when the Second Temple is finally converted by the Maccabean, who at no place can establish any lineage to the house of Yasharel. And in fact, I think their name themselves betrays them, whether they were Hyrcanian from the land of Hyrcania, which is now called Armenia, whether they were Hasmonean, as they claimed their dynasty was, not Judean, but Hasmonean, or whether they were of the tribe of Makkah, calling themselves Maccabean, because they were the tribe of Makkah, the 12th son of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. These are the 3 pointers we have to the fact that the Maccabean were not of the house of Yasharel. Yet they nonetheless converted over to Judaism, and they reinstated the temple predicated on several things. One, they predicated it upon the written oral law. This was a written oral law that the traditions, however they have been manipulated, however they have been changed, however they had been extrapolated during their Babylonian captivity and during the time that they were under Persian and then Greek warlords, however that oral law had been interpreted and changed, that got written down and became the dominant treatise of law called the Talmud or the Mishnah. And this Mishnah and the Talmud then became the dominant theory of Judaism, which began to practice a specific kind of faith predicated upon a temple that had no Ark of the Covenant and that was engaged in ritual. Very important stuff. Now, the question is, this second temple that was built, how ratty was it? How shabby was it? Who knows? But the story tells us that Herod the Great came in and said, you know what? We're going to make that a really special kind of temple. Now, Herod the Great, you can still see the edifices he was responsible for building. You can go to Israel right now and see what Herod the Great built. For instance, you can go up to Masada, which was his winter palace. They're overlooking the Dead Sea. I mean, good choice, Herod. He had a spectacular vista from the top of that mesa there, overlooking the Dead Sea. It was notoriously warmer than any other spot in Israel because it's 2,600 feet below sea level. So a very warm spot. And he built himself a palace with a pool. And the pool was one of those zero-line pools that looks out over the Dead Sea. And he had a Roman sauna built up there. And he even had aqueducts built that would naturally fill during the rainstorms. They would naturally fill these 100,000-gallon cisterns of fresh water at the top of the hill. So he didn't even have to tow the water up the hill. He just waited for it to flood, and it came down through this azimuth, if you will, this venturi that was between the two mountains. And it forced the water to come down at 60, 70 feet. And it would fill up the aquifer and force that water right up the mesa to the top of Masada to fill those 100,000-gallon cisterns. I believe there's 3 of them up there. So he had plenty of fresh water up there. He had everything he needed for him to have a winter palace at Masada. And he also built the tomb at Marat Machpelah, which is the tomb of Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and so forth in Hebron. This was constructed initially by Herod the Great. How can you tell? The size of the limestones that were used to build this Marat Machpelah, this particular memorial. He also built the Western Wall. Now, the Western Wall, we believe it to be the Fortress Antonia. Of course, in Judaism, they believe it to be the Western Wall of the Temple Mount. Now, I think the Temple Mount, and I think Josephus articulates this very well, the temple itself was actually in what we would call the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem right now, and not on top of the Temple Mount. In fact, I personally believe, I'm just going to share this as my opinion, I personally believe that the situs of the second temple, this is the one that Herod had completely rebuilt to build a spectacular edifice in the construction skill of Herod, was set up in such a place that the Holy of Holies, right now you can find it in Eastern Jerusalem, excuse me, not in Eastern Jerusalem, in Old Jerusalem, in the Jewish quarter, by going to the Karaite synagogue and looking at the ancient ruin of a synagogue that was completely destroyed in the 1967 war, which has never been rebuilt. That is the spot that I believe was actually the Holy of Holies of the second temple. The first temple being Solomon's temple, which they believe that they have found. Don Esposito and others believe that they found Solomon's temple just down the hill from there in the ancient city of David. And they were able to find, the troughs for draining blood and, the sacrifice area and so on and so forth. And it became quite convincing that that was Solomon's temple. So what we see with the Wailing Wall, the Kotel, is you see more of Herod's construction with huge limestones being cut to build this wall, this massive wall. It's very interesting that they found coins from under the wall, from 3 and 8 and 10 BC. They found them under the wall. So it gives you an indication of how recent that wall was. And that wall was built by Herod to accommodate a Roman group that would be typically a house on a 35-acre surface that they would be using that to control. Remember, Herod was an agent for Rome who sought to extend Rome's control over the province of Judea and to wrest control away from the Hasmoneans, which were expressed in their dynasty with the last king called Antigonus, whom Herod beheaded down at Jericho. But now Antigonus, had sons, including Aristobulus IV, who would marry one of Herod's daughters, Mariamne III. So you see that Herod never really fully secured governorship or leadership over Rome, over Judea, over the area of the Maccabean kingdom, the Hasmonean kingdom. He was a governor of sort, but he never really quite had complete control because the Hasmonean kings in the line of the Maccabees, including John Hyrcanus and Shimon Maccabee and so on and so forth, until you get to Antigonus, they also asserted control. And to this day, there is a certain amount of control expressed in Jerusalem on behalf of the Maccabees when you talk about the Armenian quarter of Old Jerusalem. The Armenian quarter is another name for it, would be Hasmonean quarter or the Hyrcanian quarter. All of this quarter retained jurisdiction by the remnant of the Hasmonean dynasty. Very interesting stuff. Now, when we get into this a little bit further, we can see that this temple, the second temple, was modified. How do you put it? They did he did an upgrade. He did an upgrade on the second temple to create the Herodian temple. But the Herodian temple was likely a third temple. Herod's temple was likely the temple described in Ezekiel. And when we talk about this, one of the things that keeps people off the touch of that keeps people off the touch is the fact that the cubit described in Ezekiel shows that the outer court is going to be some miles long, 22 miles long, 7 miles wide, etc. That's because the inference is that the cubit in Ezekiel is the same cubit as described in Genesis. The cubit in Genesis, of course, being from the tip of the fingers to the elbow, and that would be Genesis cubit. But Ezekiel's cubit is not. Ezekiel's cubit is the hand. The square of the hand. This is Ezekiel's cubit. So when you go to Ezekiel's cubit and you use the cubit that way, you find out that the temple of Herod was much closer to Ezekiel's temple as described in the last 3 chapters of Ezekiel. Now, also when you look at this, you can also see that the temple practices had changed. They were not the Levitical practices of Moshe in the desert and couldn't be because they did not have a tabernacle. They had a temple. Instead, they were practicing Ezekiel's pattern of sacrifice. Now, this is why people get confused. They're waiting for a third temple and the return of the sacrifice because they think Ezekiel's temple has not been built yet. But I submit to you that it has been built, that it was built under Herod the Great. and that the sacrifices that were proposed by Ezekiel were practiced at that time. Okay. So were there modifications to the second temple? Looks like it. Herod modified it substantially. Were there modifications to the Levitical system? That also looks to be the case too, that Ezekiel would modify it. Was Herod's temple actually the temple described in the Sefer Yechezkel? And were the Levitical practices at that time consistent with Yechezkel rather than Moshe? And that appears to be the case too. So looking at the Mishkan, with all of its implications, ultimately reveals a prophecy of the destruction of the extensive masonry called the temple. It also forecasts the simplicity of the common faith to which all of us are subject. Would Assyria have lusted after a mere tent? Would Babylon have mounted up a great army to capture a tent of skins? And who in the modern world would go to war to prevent the lifting up of the tabernacle in its original form? Yahuah kept it surprisingly simple for all of us, yet the assertion of Yahuah and his authority, and his ultimate authority, is unmistakable. Now, let's talk about this again for a minute. Because again, you see this idea that comes to David's mind and it comes to Solomon's mind. We need to create a long-lasting edifice, not something that's going to be made of skins where the skins are going to wear out, they're going to rot, and you're going to have to replace them. But it is a condition of, we're going to put a long-lasting edifice up there. And so as a consequence, we see masonry founded in the mind of Solomon. Now, this is accepted by the Freemasons worldwide, that Solomon is their father, and that this idea of the masonry that went into the temple is the masonry that should be followed. And we see this throughout Europe with the construction of huge edifices that they call churches that are predicated upon the practice of masonry. Let's build a magnificent structure here that is Masonic in its idea, Masonic in its concept, Masonic in its construction, Masonic in its completion. And once this is constructed, we have an enduring edifice here. We have an enduring building that proclaims the supremacy of the Masonic order and not the supremacy of Yahuah. Now, Solomon did it, put up the temple, and it wasn't many years later that that temple would be destroyed. Nehemiah and Ezra came back and said, we need to rebuild it. And they were finally granted permission, go rebuild it. They went and rebuilt it, and that temple was destroyed. That Masonic order, and Yah himself allowed those temples to be completely destroyed. And in fact, it is Mashiach that says, not one single stone will remain. Not one stone will remain. Not one stone will remain. And now this is something that Yah allowed. Now, if Yah was looking for a place that he was going to place his name eternally, that temple would still be in existence. But it's not in existence. And it's not because Yah made a mistake. That's not the case at all. It is the case that Yah told Moshe, you build the tabernacle the way I tell you to build it. Not the way you tell yourself to build it, the way I tell you to build it. And that is the discussion for today. Okay. So with that, we're going to share the screen. Yeah, here, let's see here. Let's share the screen with somebody besides me. All right. Let's share this. And let's bounce it up into a full-size screen. There we go. All right. So here is our presentation this evening. Our presentation is on the Mishkan. All of this presentation is taken from the Sefer Millennium, all citations from the Sefer Millennium edition. And this is brought to you by Sefer Publishing Group, the publishers of the Et Sefer, who can be found at sefer.net, sefer.net. Okay. All right, let's jump in. Mishkan, the pattern of the tabernacle. Okay. So let's begin here. Let's begin in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. We have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle. Oh, wait a minute. Hold it. Just hold it here just a second, because I have to annotate. Otherwise, we're not having any fun. Okay. A minister of the sanctuary, and of the true tabernacle. So here we have this author in Hebrews telling us that there's a true tabernacle. So, gee, is that Solomon's temple? Which Yahuah pitched, and not man. Oh. So we're talking about something that is pitched, not built with stone. That is the true tabernacle. This is in the book of Hebrews telling you this. The true tabernacle, pitched, not built, pitched by Yah, not built by men. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices. Wherefore, it is of necessity that this man, Mashiach, have somewhat to offer. For if he were on the earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are already priests that offer gifts according to the Torah, who serve unto the example and the shadow of heavenly things. Just as Paul says that these are that the new moons and the Shabbat and the feasts and the proper drink and the proper food are shadows of things to come. So is serving the Levitical priesthood, serving in the shadow of heavenly things. As Moshe was admonished, he was admonished by Elohim when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, says he, you make all things according to the pattern showed to you in the mount. Don't make it according to your pattern. Don't make it according to your idea. Don't decide, gee, I'm not going to use this, I'm going to use that. No, you need to build it according to the pattern that I give you exactly, and don't change up anything. Build it exactly the way I told you to build it. He was admonished to build it that way. Admonished to build it that way. Okay? And so Moshe builds it that way, and then several hundred years later, hey, what do you think, guys? We maintain the fur-covered tent? No, we need something better than that. We need something that's got some longevity in it. We need something that's got stone. Even if Yah told them through the prophet Nathan, build a temple to my name, he didn't say, and by the way, tear down the tabernacle and ditch the Ark of the Covenant and put that over in the temple. Yahuah spoke unto Moshe, saying, speak unto the children of Yasharel, that they bring me an offering of every man that gives willingly with his heart, you shall take my offering. And this is the offering which you shall take of them, gold and silver and brass, and blue and purple and scarlet, and fine linen and goat's hair, and ram skin, dyed red, and antelope skins, and shittim wood, oil for the light, spices for anointing oil, and for sweet incense, onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Now, this case, when we're talking about this sanctuary, the true sanctuary, Yah dwells among them. According to all that I show you, at the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye, not may ye, shall ye make it. You shall make it after the pattern shown to you. That's how you should make it, in the pattern that I give you. Here's the pattern, here's the blueprint. Don't vary from the blueprint. Don't vary from the pattern. Build it according to the pattern that I give you. Now, imagine if you were talking about if he was giving them a pattern to build something that they didn't know, like an airplane. I'm going to give you a pattern to build a jet aircraft. I want you to build it exactly as I tell you to build it. Well, we thought we were going to do that, but we decided we wanted to use something a little more substantial in the plane rather than titanium. So we decided to use, steel. Oh, you decided to use steel. Okay, yeah, we decided that we wanted to use wood here and not some of the lightweight material you're talking about. Great. What happens to the plane? Doesn't fly. And so here you have Yah telling him, build this exactly as I tell you to build it. Okay, so the tabernacle, however, begins with 3 instruments: the ark, the table, the menorah. All right, So we note in the instance of all these instruments and the ephod and the Urim and the Thummim and so on, there can be no violation of the second commandment concerning engraved images, as these are specifically required by Yah. Now, it's also of a point that none of these images, neither the ark, nor the table, nor the menorah, are to be bowed to. You don't come in and genuflect in front of the menorah and say, "Oh, menorah, how sweet is thy light." That doesn't happen. These are not to be bowed to, right? These are instruments of the temple. They're instruments of the temple that are there for a particularized reason. They're there for a particularized reason. And we're going to see what that is. Okay. So the ark, now the ark is described in Shemot, that's Exodus 25, verses 10 through 22. All right, well, what do we know about it? We'll just kind of summarize it. First of all, we know it's built of wood. Okay, in this case, shittim wood, a particular kind of wood, hardwood. And it's to be 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5 cubits, right? So you got, 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. 2.5 here. And 1.5 here, right? And here. So 1.5, 1.5, and 2.5. These are this is the size of the ark. Okay. And that's going to be, by the way, these cubits are Noah cubits, not Ezekiel cubits, because Ezekiel hadn't been born yet. Noah cubits. Some people say that's 18 inches. Some people say it's 27.3, according to Isaac Newton. Okay. Overlaid with gold in and out and with a crown of gold. 4 gold rings on the 4 corners, 4 gold-covered staves with which to carry it. And it shall contain the testimony. That's the language used in Shemot, which is the 10 devarim on sapphire stones. Now, it's interesting. This is going down here. But you're going to see that ultimately this testimony is going to be the 10 devarim, handwritten by Yah on sapphires. Okay. Then a mercy seat is to be set atop of pure gold, with 2 cherubim of gold on the ends with their wings pointing on high and faces facing each other. The mercy seat is the point at which Yahweh communes with Yasharel. This is according to Yah's word. I will commune to you from the mercy seat. Okay, so if you were going to go out there and say, "Hey, look, we got the whole universe out here. Where do you think Yah is going to meet people?" "Well, I think he's going to do it at 25,000 feet in a space station." "Oh, I think he's going to do it on the top of Mount Moriah." "Well, I think that he's going to do it here. I think he's going to do it there." Well, Yah tells you where he's going to meet you face to face. He's going to meet you face to face. He's going to commune with you from this point forward at the mercy seat. This is where he's going to commune with you, at the mercy seat. This is the focal point of all the focal points in the world. You start looking at all these focal points. When you get to these focal points, right here, the mercy seat is where it's going to happen, not someplace else. This is why, if you don't have an Ark of the Covenant and you don't have an Ark of the and you don't have the mercy seat in the second temple, well, then what are you going to do? What are you doing there in the second temple? You're just going through the motions, because there's no mercy seat. There's no point of commune between you and Yah. So the ark, now this is a pretty good depiction of the ark, because we can see it might be a little bit ornate, but we can see that we've got, the crown here. Here's the cover, right? Here are the cherubim. Now you can see in this case, the cherubim are done correctly. These are going up into the air, which is what, as it specifies. This is the top of the mercy seat here. This is the point of commune between Yah and Moshe in the house of Yasharel, right? And then this is the box that is, if you measure it, this is 2.5 cubits here, right? And then this is going to be 1.5 cubits from here to here, 1.5. Which means that the width is going to be the same the same far apartness. It's going to be the same distance as the height. Okay. All right. So that is the Ark of the Covenant. Pretty good depiction. All right. Now, what about the table? Table is the next thing on the instruction sheet. And this is going to be found right there in Shemot 25, verses 23 through 30. So what do we know? It's built of shittim wood, and it's 2 by 1 by 1.5 cubits. Okay, well, this is interesting. So it's the same height. It's the same height. It's 1.5 cubits high. Same height. So we got 1.5 cubits high. But it's only going to be 2 feet by 1 feet. So this is going to be narrower down here, and this is going to be shorter. Right? It's going to be narrower and shorter than the Ark of the Covenant, but it's going to be overlaid with gold in and out, and it's going to have a crown of gold. It's going to have 4 gold rings on the 4 corners and 4 gold-covered staves with which to carry it. It'll have dishes, spoons, and bowls, and they all have to be of gold set upon it. And the showbread is to be set upon this all the time. There's always supposed to be fresh bread on top of this table. The table is a perpetual statement of Yahweh's communing with Yasharel and his perpetual provision. That is, as long as this tabernacle is in place, he will provide. So here is a pretty good depiction of the table, because the table talks about it having a crown of gold around it, it being covered with gold, it having the staves to carry it, and it's relatively a pretty good shape size of it, that when you're talking about it's 1.5 cubits high, but only 1 cubit wide and 2 cubits long, right? So this is a pretty good depiction of the table of showbread. Okay. Now, what about the menorah? Now, the menorah, the menorah is a really big deal to me, because I think the menorah is really quite an instrument. It's quite something else. It's built of pure gold. It's not covered with gold. It's built of pure gold. The shaft, the branches, the bowls, the knops, and the flowers, all this stuff is gold. There's nothing, you're not going to gold plate some steel or some tungsten or something. No. This is built of pure gold. It has 6 branches. It's got 3 on one side and 3 on the other of the center shaft. The bowls are shaped like almonds with knops and flowers on each branch. But total, there are 7 lamps made, because you have a lamp in the center shaft and you have 3 on this side and 3 on that side. 7 lamps are to be lit. 7 lamps are lighted. It doesn't say don't light them. Well, we decided that because we abandoned the idea of having a tabernacle, that we're not going to light the menorah anymore. Well, maybe you should have had a tabernacle. Well, we're not going to do that. We'd rather have a temple. We'd rather have something made of stone. We'd rather have something that the masons built than to have something that Yah directed us to build in terms of the tabernacle. But in the tabernacle, the menorah was to be lit. 7 lamps are lighted, made only according to the pattern. Don't break out your new idea. Well, we got a new idea. We were thinking that maybe we would go something like this. Let's go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we'll make this one the servant branch here. We'll call that the servant branch. And then this way we can celebrate the 8 days of Hanukkah. And we'll just call this the Hanukkah. We'll make it according to our plan, not according to your plan. This one can be lit. Yours can't be lit. This is our plan. This plan is the one this one's got gusto in it. So this is the one we light. We don't light yours. We light ours, because this is the one we made up. So because this is the one we made up, we are going to light it the way we want to light it. See? So that's that, right? Nope. The menorah can only be made according to the pattern. This then becomes what? An engraved image. Oh, no. I like my Hanukkah. Engraved image. And when when you're shopping the stores in downtown Jerusalem, up there on the mall by the Jaffa Gate, you're going to find some extremely expensive Hanukkahs. We have one that's fabulous. It's a natural gas Hanukkah. You simply had it, plugged into your natural gas system, and it blows out, 8 roaring flames on the 8th day of Hanukkah, 4 feet tall, right? And I've seen some elaborate Hanukkahs, not kidding, but you don't see elaborate menorahs, because the ultimate menorah is the temple menorah. There is no menorah above that. And all other menorahs are subservient to the temple menorah and should be built in the same way as the temple menorah. And the temple menorah has to be built exactly in accordance with the plan. Don't deviate from the plan. Hold to the plan. But the menorah sets forth the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation from Hanok 93:12, right? So here's a pretty good idea of a menorah, of the temple menorah. And so you can see the knobs, and you can see the almond-shaped bowls. And you can also see here that we have this idea of three on this side, and then the center shaft called the shamash, the servant light that will then light these three on the side, right? And this is what? This is a symbol of the sevenfold doctrine. So in Hanok, chapter 93:12, it says, afterwards in the seventh week, a perverse generation shall arise. Abundant shall be its deeds, and all its deeds perverse. During its completion, the righteous shall be selected from the everlasting plant of righteousness, and to them shall be given the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. Boom. Yes, the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. We know that the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation is given to us not only in the pattern of the menorah, but it's given to us in the practice of the seventh-day Shabbat. The seventh-day Shabbat is part of the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. The seventh year sabbatical is part of the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. The seven words of Genesis 1, the seven rule code of Isaiah 11:2. These are all the seven deadly sins. These are all part of the sevenfold doctrine because Yah's character is sevenfold. How do we know this? 6 days he worked, and on the seventh day he rested. And so this is, we've talked about this many, many times. I've done many, many presentations on the sevenfold doctrine, and I'll probably end up doing another one because it's always exciting to me to talk about the sevenfold doctrine of Yah as expressed in the menorah. The menorah is a reminder of that we can see the sevenfold doctrine there in a perceptual image. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the pattern of the tabernacle itself. We're going to get into this. I'm going to kind of burn through it, but it is going to be important for us to see. Moreover, shall you make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen. Oh, okay. So we start out with fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet. With cherubim of cunning work shall you make them. So they're going to stitch in the blue and the purple and the scarlet, images of cherubim into this fine twined linen. Now we know that linen, by the way, you guys, there's some very interesting videos out there you might want to watch, but linen is derived from flax, right? It's derived from flax. So what they do is they take the flax, and of course the old method was you take the flax and then you would harvest the flax, and then you'd take the flax in a handful, and you had a board full of nails, and you take it and you thwack the flax down on the board full of nails, and then you pull the flax through, and it would pull out this fine flax that was minus all the exterior, plant stuff, and it would pull out this fine flax, and then from that fine flax, the women would take that fine flax and they would spin it together to create this linen, to create this line, this string of linen. And then this string of linen would then be used on a loom to create a linen garment or, a linen bit of cloth. And so this practice of the flax, Moshe talks about the flax when he's talking about the first month of the year. He talks about the barley and the flax, right? And so it's very clear that they knew of this, of how to make linen clothing from flax back in the times of Moshe. You're talking, around, circa 1500 BC. And he was specifying to them, you need to use fine curtains of twined linen. First, you shall make these fine curtains of twined linen. Well, why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is that linen is a non-conducer, okay? When you wear linen, a couple of things happen. One, you can wear linen all day long and never get a shock. Right? You're not going to be walking along going, gee, I'm generating static electricity in my linen clothing. It doesn't happen. And it also prevents sweating because it's a breathable cloth. But we've talked about linen extensively during the Sabbath meeting and some other places. That linen has a frequency, and the frequency is very, very good for you. It protects you against outside radiation, including microwave radiation, by the way. So linen is protector against microwave radiation and other kinds of frequency radiation. It doesn't cause sweat, and most importantly, it doesn't create static electric spark. Okay. So we begin with this idea, okay, you guys need to use linen, finely twined linen, for the interior of the tabernacle, with blue, purple, and scarlet, and with cherubim of cunning artwork you shall make them. The length of one curtain shall be 8 and 20 cubits, 28 cubits. Well, that's like 56 feet. And the breadth of one curtain, 4 cubits, almost 10 feet. And every one of the curtains shall have one measure. So all the curtains are the same size. The 5 curtains shall be coupled together, one to another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled one to another. Okay, so sew those together. All right. Of course, they didn't sew back then. They did a different kind of coupling. And ye shall make loops of blue upon the edge of one curtain from the selve edge of the coupling, and likewise shall you make it in the uttermost edge of another curtain in the coupling of the second. 50 loops shall you make in the one curtain, and 50 loops shall you make in the edge of the curtain that is coupling of the second, that the loops may take hold of one another. And you shall make 50 taches of gold and couple the curtains together with the taches, and it shall be one tabernacle, and it shall be one tabernacle. Okay, so here you see this kind of coupling device right here, right? This is a particularly good image, but you can see this was the coupling device here. And the coupling device would be, you would have 50 of these, and then you would just plug in the other one. So it'd be kind of like, they latch together. Click, 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 click. And this is how you did it. And they were gold latches that came together. Okay. And what? You shall make curtains of goat's hair. Oh, okay. Now we're going to make curtains of goat's hair to be a covering upon the tabernacle. 11 curtains you shall make. The length of one curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain, 4 cubits. Okay, same width, but longer, quite a bit longer. And the 11 curtains shall all be of one measure. And you shall couple 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves, and shall double the 6th curtain in the forefront of the tabernacle. So it's going to be double thickness. And you shall make 50 loops on the edge of one curtain that is the outmost of the coupling, 50 loops on the edge of the curtain which couples the second. And you shall make 50 taches of brass, not gold, and put the taches into the loops and couple the tent together that it may be one, and the remnant that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half. Okay, yeah. All right, so we can see that we got a little bit of extra layover here with the goat's hair. And you shall make curtains of goat's hair to be a covering upon the tabernacle. 11 curtains shall you make. The length of one curtain shall be 30 cubits. The breadth of one curtain, 4 cubits, and 11 curtains shall be all of one measure. You shall couple 5 curtains by the. Okay, I think we already talked about this. Yes, we did. Okay, and the remnant that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remains, shall hang over the backside of the tabernacle, and a cubit on the one side and a cubit on the other side of that which remains in the length of the curtains of the tent. It shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on this side and that side to cover it. So you have the linen doing this, here's the linen. You've got the linen going like this. Here's the linen. And then you put the goat's hair on there, and the goat's hair is kind of like this. So this seals the linen from the ground here, because the goat's hair goes all the way down there. Okay. And then get this. And you shall make a covering for the tent of ram skins dyed red, and a covering above of antelope skins. Oh, okay. So here we go. Now we're going to put on some ram skins. And now we're going to put on some antelope skins. You could say that the tabernacle's getting kind of skinny. Yeah, that's bad. That's bad. Okay. So here's the kind of the description of the layers of insulation. You get some idea in this mock-up. So we see here the linen with the cherubim featured here. Then we're going to see the goat's hair. Then we're going to see the ram skin. Then we're going to see the antelope. You can see, so we see these different layers of skin that are laid down on top of this tabernacle, Now, all of these things, this stuff isn't just because, gee, we're goat herders, let's use some skin. No, there's some, and this, of course, is inaccurate in this respect. See this right here? See that? That's not accurate. This should come all the way down. This, first of all, this should come down to here, and this should come all the way down here onto the ground. All right. How about the boards of the tabernacle? These are to be made of shittim wood, each 10 by 1.5 cubits. Okay, 20 feet by, let's call it 4 feet wide. 10 sockets of silver per board, 20 boards on the north, 20 boards on the south, 6 boards on each of the connecting side, with 2 boards for the corners to connect it. All right. How about the beams and the bars of the tabernacle? Made of shittim wood, 5 over one side of the tabernacle, 5 over the other. So if you're talking about the superstructure of the roof, let's put some beams down here. Now we got the superstructure of the roof, which is, so you're going to have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. Okay, and then there's a center beam that runs down here like this. Center beam running the length. Okay, so this is the structure of the ceiling. All right. And all overlaid with gold. Hey, we've got some gold beams in this place. When you look up, you see gold beams. All right. Then we come to the veil. Now the veil is going to divide the temple, or the tabernacle rather. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen. Again, once again, we're back to the linen of cunning work. With cherubim it shall be made. And you shall hang it upon 4 pillars of shittim wood overlaid with gold. And their hooks shall be of gold, and upon the 4 sockets of silver. And you shall hang up the veil under the taches, that you may bring in thither within the veil at the ark of the testimony. And the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy. Now here we see, I brought some Hebrew in here just so we could have some Hebrew fun. But here is this passage right here, right? And so what we see here in the most holy, the way this is going to be phrased is Kodesh HaKodeshim. Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now there's another place that we find this phrasing, Kodesh Kodeshim, which is in Daniy'el 9:24. And so you'll see in a lot of passages, it will say, well, and seal up this, and including sealing up the most holy. And the most holy is the way this provision is used here. But another way of putting that is the holy of holies. Now you can see where you might get this passage, holy of holies, because Kodeshim here, Kodeshim is what? In the plural. It's in the masculine plural. So if Kodesh is holy, then Kodeshim is holies. So we can have the inference with the he being of, holy of holies. Okay. And you shall hang up the veil under the taches, that you may bring it thither within the veil at the ark of the testimony. Now we know that this was imitated in the temple. But bear in mind, the temple was not built in accordance with Yah's instruction to use specific skins over linen. And the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy, and you shall put the mercy seat upon the ark of the testimony in the most holy place. And you shall set the table without the veil and the menorah over against the table on the side of the tabernacle towards the south, and you shall put the table on the north side, and you shall make a hanging for the door of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework. And you shall make for the hanging 5 pillars of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold, and their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 sockets of brass for them. Okay. Very, very interesting that we have this kind of pattern. So we can see here kind of an illustration of how this tabernacle worked. So you can see that on this side, we have the menorah. On this side, we have the table of showbread. Then we have the veil here. And behind the veil, we find, that's a weird looking art. Okay, I guess it's just the lighting. We find the Ark of the Covenant behind here. We find the Ark of the Covenant here behind the veil. Okay. All right. So this is kind of a pretty good depiction. You can get an idea of what it looks like. And it came to pass, as he came nigh unto the camp, and that he saw the calf and the dancing, Moshe's anger waxed hot. Now, we're going to talk here for a minute about the powder of gold. Now, I'm bringing this up because we're going to talk about what's going on with the Ark of the Covenant, what's going on with the mercy seat, and what's going on with the idea of using linen inside the tent, linen for the veil, linen for the doorway, and linen clothing for the priests. What's going on with this? Okay, well, we're going to talk about the powder of gold. Now, we have a passage here in Shemot that indicates that Moshe at one point had gold powder. It came to pass as soon as he came nigh unto the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moshe's anger waxed hot, and he cast the sapphires out of his hands and broke them beneath the mount. He was the first to break all 10 commandments. And he took the calf which they had made and burnt it in the fire. Now, this is a critical point, okay? He took the calf which they had made and he burned it in the fire and ground it to powder. Okay, well, grounding gold to powder really doesn't work. Now, I've heard a lot of guys say, oh, well, what he did was he ground the ashes that were also in the wood that, they were using to burn the fire into powder, and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Yasharel drink of it. Yeah, not entirely. I think what we find here is that Moshe, by burning the golden calf in the fire, ended up with white powder gold. Somehow he ended up with white powder gold. Now, there's a lot of implications behind this. One is that this fire was hotter than you might think. And so instead of melting it into an alloy, it actually heated the gold up to a point that the gold converted its atomic structure into becoming a white powder form of gold, because it's clear that at the end of it, Moshe had powder sufficient to make people drink of it. All right, well, let's explore this just a little bit. The monatomic state of gold. Now, the monoatomic state of gold was discovered by a guy named David Hudson, at least in the modern epoch, and is a white powder with completely different physical properties than metallic gold. The monoatomic states of gold are referred to as ORME, orbitally rearranged monatomic elemental forms. Monoatomic gold is a structure of two gold atoms connected by a single quantum whose orbits contain two electrons with opposite quantum mechanical spins. The structure is stable against chemical attacks because of the symmetrical electronic bond and contains paired electrons. So this is very, very interesting that you have two gold atoms connected by a single quantum, And so you have this idea, well, I probably shouldn't get into drawing that. But you have this idea of one atom over here and its properties. And there's one that belongs over here that's, doing the figure eight. And it's coming around here with one quantum that's attached to this. Now, in that one quantum, but you have paired electrons. So this thing is very stable, okay? Very stable. It's not like an unstable isotope. This is a very stable isotope. All right. So according to Sir Lawrence Gardner, the author of the 2003 book, Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, scientific journals from Switzerland, Germany, Italy, Spain, France, Singapore, Israel, Britain, and America are all commenting in this regard with headlines such as, quote, the amazing properties of monoatomic gold, unquote. There are no limitations on this now. Singapore University is making great progress with gold in cancer treatment. Rice University, Texas has reported amazing success in recent remedial trials with nano gold. Nano gold. Okay, now this is from the white powder gold of the ancients, And then I give you the website right here. If you guys can capture that, there's the website right there. It's bibliotecapleiades.net. Okay. But he goes on to say, monatomic transition group elements were classified some time ago as quote unquote exotic matter because they have a negative energy density and the ability to manipulate space-time. Oh, well, isn't that interesting? Physicists now say that the exotic matter is the key to traveling enormous distances, seemingly faster than the speed of light, but with an acceleration rate of 0. We also have the aircraft industry investigating the concept of anti-gravity flight. Anti-gravity flight. Why? Because monatomic gold at certain temperatures takes on negative weight. It's not only weightlessness, but it's negative weight. And remember, I before E, except after C, or when sounding as A, as in neighbor, and weight. Negative weight, okay? All right, so what did they say here? We also have the aircraft industry investigating anti-gravity flight. Monatomic elements are operative high-temperature superconductors. High-temperature superconductors. Now, that's something interesting too, because at high temperatures, there's superconductors, and superconductors will levitate. Levitate. Now, you can imagine they have a null magnetic field and will repel external magnetic fields. The Center for Advanced Study in Illinois has classified superconductivity as the most remarkable physical property in the universe. Now, we see evidence that Moshe had a powdered form of gold. Now, not only did we see that, but we see that he also had a lot of other gold that they were using to cover everything with. But if there were, in fact, monatomic gold inside the Ark of the Covenant and the bulk of the weight of the Ark was contained in a solid gold lid that some commentators has estimated weighed as much as 3,500 pounds, how do you get 4 Levites to carry a 3,500-pound gold lid through the desert? Well, scripture is very specific. It says, look, when Yah was with us, we picked up the covenant, we picked up the ark and moved. And when he wasn't, we sat it down and that was it. There wasn't any moving it. And they waited for Yah's instruction as to when to go. Well, if this instruction was predicated because they had monatomic gold inside the Ark of the Covenant, that when that monatomic gold hit a negative superconductivity with repelling magnetic fields, that it would come to the top and begin to push the lid of the tabernacle, or the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, upward. That is to say, it would levitate it to a 0 weight, in which case the Levites were able to simply pick up what was left of the weight, which was less than 180 pounds, and go hucka-chuck-chucking through the desert with no difficulty carrying the Ark of the Covenant because of the negative weight that was contained by the monatomic gold, the white powder gold contained inside the Ark. All right. Now, we also see something else here that he says, well, look, if you look at this closely, you'll see that this monatomic gold also has the capability to manipulate space-time. Now, remember what Yah tells Moshe. Yah tells Moshe, on this mercy seat is where I will commune with you. I will commune with you on this mercy seat. Now, just assuming that there was white powder gold inside that mercy seat, was there the capability to manipulate space-time? Predicate. I'm just talking about some natural functionality of what we know was miraculous things happening during the time of Moshe. Okay, so let's continue on with this and see what we have here. But did the ancient people know about these things? Well, according to Sir Gardner, they certainly knew about monatomic elements and superconductors, even if they didn't understand the science behind them. There were various names and terms for these phenomena in different cultures. As for the scientific aspects, maybe they didn't know specifically that these magical powders, quote unquote, these extraordinary powders is a better way to put it, resonated with DNA. What? Yes, these powders resonate with DNA, or that they were immune system enhancers. Why? Because the molecular structure of a monatomic element is consistent with and looks conspicuously like the double helix of DNA. but they undoubtedly knew of their healing and anti-aging properties. They also told of levitation, movement into parallel dimensions, communications with gods, and the like. In so many instances, their descriptions were commensurate with modern scientific discoveries. They just used different terminology. They might not have known precisely what they were dealing with, but they clearly knew about the substances in action. Now, again, we see here this idea. They knew of healing, anti-aging properties, but there was levitation consistent with monatomic weight. Monatomic weight, because it's anti-magnetic, becomes a levitation device, which then caused movement into parallel dimensions. Now, again, parallel dimensions, we would describe as heavens, right? And Paul says, I knew a man who went into the third heaven. He's talking about himself. Isaiah went to the throne in heaven. John went to the throne in heaven, right? Into parallel dimensions, communications with quote unquote Elohim. Well, we know there was communication going on between Moshe and Yah, and Yah says specifically, I will commune with you from this mercy seat, right? And so they may have used different language. Well, that would be one way of putting it. But according to Gardner, they knew of the properties. All right. Well, according to David Meyer, the Ark of the Covenant had substantial capability. Now, we're going to look at the Ark of the Covenant now. One, it killed those who touched it. So here's, Shemuel Sheni, chapter 6, verses 6 through 7. And when they came to Natan's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the Ark of Elohim and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of Yahuah was kindled against Uzzah, and Elohim smote him there for his error, and there he died by the Ark of Elohim. Boom, just like that. Why? How many thousands of volts were contained in that ark? It was unapproachable while in the tabernacle, and Moshe was not able to enter into the tent of the assembly because of the cloud above thereon, and the glory of Yahuah filled the tabernacle. So Moshe couldn't even go in at times. We're going to find out why here in just a minute. And finally, it was used to communicate with Yahuah. And there I will meet with you, and I will commune with you from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony, at of all the things which I will give you in commandment unto the children of Yisrael. That's from Shemot 25:22. On September 9th, 1915, when the famous scientist Nikola Tesla published an article entitled The Wonder World to be Created by Electricity, in it he made the following astounding claim. Moses was undoubtedly a practical and skillful electrician far in advance of his time. The Bible describes precisely and minutely arrangements constituting a machine in which electricity was generated by friction of air against silk curtains and stored in a box constructed like a condenser. It's very plausible to assume that the sons of Aaron were killed by a high tension discharge. Now, Nikola Tesla would know something about that. The term condenser is an older word for what we now know as a capacitor, or an electrical machine capable of storing energy. Tesla thought that the ark generated static electricity by causing air to rub against the curtains. This created static electricity, which was then stored inside the ark, turning the box into a giant Leyden jar. Now, you can imagine that the box, if the box also, depending on what the gold was inside the box, if this box was generating static electricity and it was in massive volts, 100,000 volts or more, this voltage would have the capability to heat the box and create monatomic systems inside a gold-covered box, right? Because it was a capacitor and it was creating high-tension discharges. Yeah. According to Michael Blackburn and Mark Bennett, the true secret lies within the tabernacle. In the picture below, the ark is in the foreground, the tabernacle is being constructed in the background. The tabernacle was a roofless, three-walled wooden structure. It was closed off with curtains made of different materials. There was no roof. It was just linen and furs. No roof. There was nothing else but linen and furs. And it was closed off with curtains made of different materials, including goat's hair and ram skins. These curtains rubbed against each other, creating an initial static charge. As this charge built up, the entire structure, along with the ark, became highly electrified. At full tilt, Blackburn and Bennett estimate that the ark would have been capable of carrying a charge in the range of 50,000 volts. Now, this is from Ark of the Covenant Lost Technology, posted by David Meyer on July 23rd, 2011. And I give the website address here at the bottom. Okay. So interesting stuff. Now, let's talk a little bit. You got 50,000 volts of static electricity generated inside a roofless tabernacle. Now, you think about the roofless tabernacle. You think about the fact that Yah had made it particular. I want you to have these kind of skins on top of linen, on top of a otherwise roofless tabernacle. It's going to be a tent, not a Masonic building, not a building of stone. And he wanted it a particular way. Why? So that he could commune through this idea of monatomics, through this idea of transdimensionalism, through this idea of outside of being space and time, that Yah would commune outside of space and time through dimensions via this static electricity that was being generated in a method that Yah had given with particularity to Moshe. Build it just like this and not any other way. Solomon says, well, I'm going to build a temple to your name, and we're going to build it with stone, and we're going to build it with cedar, and we're going to make it look good, and it's going to be like my palace, and it's going to be great. But Yah didn't tell him to build anything out of stone. He never told him to build anything out of stone. You want to build a temple? Okay, build the temple. That you build a temple for my name. That's not a tabernacle. That's not a tabernacle. So what does he tell us in Scripture? You shall not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as of woolen and linen together. Now, a lot of people coming into Torah, they get really ticked off at this passage. Oh, come on. I wear polyester all the time. What are you talking about? I can't wear woolen and linen together. That's such a ridiculous, arbitrary, dumb rule that anybody knows you can wear blended this, a blended some little cotton, a little polyester, a little this, a little that. What's the problem? Why is this stupid rule out there? Here's why. Because linen creates no spark. There's no static spark when you wear linen. And not only that, but if you put a linen hat on over your head, your hair can't create a static spark. But if you've got any wool on, come on, how many times you put a wool sweater on, you try to sit down on your couch, you get zapped, or you walk by a chair and you get zapped, or you go by some other kind of conductive material and you get zapped, you get voltage. This is just latent static electricity laying around. We're not talking about stuff that's been generated and housed under a particular capacitor made with certain furs and linen curtains. We're not talking about that. No, we're talking about just generally speaking. So the reason why you were not to wear anything woolen and linen together, because if you start mixing wool with linen, you have no chance when it comes to a high static electricity environment. You're going to get zapped and killed. And the priest could not take a chance of them ending up with a talit that was half wool, half linen, or them ending up with a garment that was supposedly linen but had some wool in it, because one single spark and boom, they're fried in front of the ark. Just like that. And so what does it say in Leviticus? And the priest whom he shall anoint and whom he shall consecrate to minister in the priest's office in his father's stead shall make the atonement and shall put on the linen clothes, even the holy garments. You will not go into the Holy of Holies unless you're wearing the holy garments. So now we understand the reason for the wool, because wool creates a static spark and linen doesn't. Okay, now we're going to talk about a few aspects of the tabernacle, but before we do, I just want to kind of jump in here and see if there are any questions going on so far that I can answer before we close up this production. Anybody have any ideas or questions about what we've gone through so far? Yeah, here we go. I see Frank. Frank, thank you for agreeing with me. They had electricity. I mean, we know that in Egypt, we know that, for instance, the passages that run down through the Great Pyramid are too long. That for them to use torches to do the paintings inside. So there's study of the Babylonian battery. There's also pictures of ancient light bulbs that were present. Okay, so David asked, have you heard of studies showing the tabernacle not being rectangular because it would call for more than Yah listed and would be unstable, which being displayed in the desert before Yah? Now, I have heard of this, David. In fact, I read a book on the tabernacle potentially being round in its shape. And, it's very possible that we don't have the exact dimensions. We're kind of summarizing it based on what we can see here. The tabernacle, a power generator capable of interdimensional travel. Well, that's what it appears like, Jakumba. That's what it appears like when you look at what's going on here with the either monatomic gold in the base of the ark, or the ark having the capability at high voltage to make the gold monatomic, right? And so this is a very interesting situation with the tabernacle. Okay, now so let me see if we got any more questions here before I drop back into the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go back in and talk and kind of wrap up some aspects about the tabernacle, because there are some other aspects to the tabernacle that are extremely important. Okay. Yeah. I agree with you, Christine. Yeah, Alan did some great teaching. I really enjoy his teaching, particularly on the Odiot, and I also like his demeanor. He just seemed to be a very calm guy, right? Didn't he? Okay, so with that, let's drop back in and let's see if we can get the remainder of this teaching. Okay. So the pattern of the tabernacle. Now, the singularity of the design of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah express the singular authority of Yahuah and the Torah. This becomes very, very important because Yah is telling you, you're going to have one tabernacle, you're going to have one menorah, you're going to have one showbread, you're going to have, there's going to be one mercy seat, and there's going to be one point of commune between me and you on all the earth. In all of existence, this between mankind and me, this is the singular point of commune, right? Now, it is written in Vayikra, you shall have one manner of law, as well for the stranger as for one of your own country, for I am Yahweh Elohim. That's out of Leviticus 24:22. How about in Numbers? It reads, one Torah and one manner of law shall be for you and for the stranger that sojourns with you. There's one law. Yahweh Echad. There is one law. There's one law. There's one authority. And that's expressed in the tabernacle. The singularity of the design of the tabernacle. You shall build it according to the pattern that I give you. The Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, express the singular authority of Yah and the Torah. And as it is written in in Ephesians by Paul, there is one body and one ruach, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling. One Yah, one faith, one baptism, one Elohim and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. One Torah, one idea, one ruach, one Yah. Now in Yeshayahu in Isaiah chapter 5, it reads like this. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. I mean, that's where we are right now in the world. That's where we are. That's what wokeism is. Putting evil good, calling good evil, putting darkness for light and light for darkness, and putting bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes. He should have used the word woke. Woe unto them that are woke in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine and men of strength to mingle strong drink, which justify the wicked for reward. Justify the wicked for reward, you mass media people, and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble and the flame consumes the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away at the Torah of Yahuah Sebaot and despised at the word of the Holy One of Yasharel. The Holy One of Yasharel. The singularity of the design of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and menorah express the singular authority of Yahuah and the Torah. There is one body and one ruach, even as ye are called in your hope of calling. One Yah, one faith, one baptism, one Elohim, and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. The tabernacle is the house for the Ark of the Covenant, and the menorah, the light of the sevenfold doctrine, is its expression. The covenant of the 10 Devarim is therefore the very throne of Yahuah. He sits upon the sapphires. The covenant of the 10 Devarim is therefore the very throne of Yahuah upon which he sits. It is therefore the singular law and the foundational authority of all law, housed in a tabernacle that would become the body of Mashiach and expressed in the sevenfold menorah that would become the light of the world. Okay. This concludes our production from Sefer Academy. All citations are taken from Sefer Millennium Edition. See us at www.sefer.net. All right. All right, my friends. So I want to thank you for that. Now let's see if we can get to some other questions on this topic, shall we? All right, let's see. Do I think the 12 stones on the breastplate did anything? All right, now this is a great question, okay? Because this is something very, very good. This is a great question because here's what you have going on. You have, I think during this time, there was something really anomalous that happened. I mean, we know that there was something anomalous that happened, for instance, during Noah's time. We had a good discussion about this on Ancient Days over at Sefer Academy. We talked about this because both John and I were talking about the idea of what came to earth. Now, some people say that there might have been a hardened canopy that came to earth that was full of ice and that melted. I tend to lean towards the idea that there was an ice ring like Saturn around the earth, a gigantic ice ring, and that ice ring, something caused it to collapse, and it collapsed onto the earth. And when it did, a lot of it clustered at the poles, the North and South Pole, but a lot of it was melted as it came through the atmosphere and caused massive flooding because it was a huge amount of ice. But you can imagine that once that ice came to earth and melted, that it's not possible for Yah to do that again unless he's going to create another ice ring, which we don't see any evidence of that at all. So as a consequence, we find out, that there's not going to be another flood. However, when we see what took place during the time of Moshe, we see something that was really crazy that took place during the time of the 10 plagues. Whether there were frogs appearing, or whether there was blood in the water, or whether what came over Egypt that killed the firstborn. This is a question, right? So I think that there is the possibility that there may have been a highly electrified environment in the atmosphere at that time. Now, let's talk about this. Let's get into this a little bit more specifically. So let's just suppose that there had been some kind of an electric grid that was created at this time. Now, this, and again, I can refer to Frank on this, we're going to get an idea. But when you're talking about this grid, let's say that these pyramids were being used to harness static electricity in a grid, and that there was a pyramid system along ley lines throughout the whole earth, and these ley lines were controlling essentially the static electricity on earth by harnessing that electricity at high voltage but extremely low amperage. Like, let's say it was at 1 amp and 250,000 volts, or something like this, something disproportionate like this. If this were the case, then it would be possible with certain transformers to convert that to a lower voltage and a higher amperage, which means that they could have done things like cause electric engines to function, or to have access to electricity for purposes of lighting up bulbs or doing this and the other thing. But it's also possible that this kind of electric grid that they put out throughout the whole earth also created an enormous amount of uncontrollable static electricity. So you had static electricity really everywhere. Now, this would be a hyper environment that eventually would go completely away. But in this hyper environment, the 12 stones on the breastplate did react. I think they had a reaction to the amount of static electricity in the air. So what you see here is you see the Ark of the Covenant, which was something directly interfacing with static electricity. And it looks like the 12 stones on the breastplate also interfaced with this amount of static electricity, such that in this kind of environment, again, remember, there was gold also included on this breastplate, that you had things happening that were quantum in nature. And what we're beginning to see now, we talk about this quantum in nature. When you look at this quantum connect between the two gold atoms in the monatomic gold, we're seeing a lot of stuff at the quantum level that appears to be cross-dimensional. And some people say that there is, the second heaven, which is full of the evil Ruach code, is a cross-dimensional circumstance that the people in CERN are trying to reach. They're trying to reach across into that dimension to open an access to these cross-dimensional beings. So was this a cross-dimensional contact that took place with the 12 stones? I mean, it's possible, especially given the heightened amount of static electricity at that time, if that was in fact the case. Okay. All right. Let's see. Now somebody writes here. Let's see. Okay. What about the missing clothes from Adam and Eve? Now, Debbie, this is discussed in the book of Yashar, what happened to those skins, right? It's well worth the read. I won't go into it here, but let's see. Okay, but there they are. Okay. Did the orientation of the tabernacle have a purpose? Yeah, now that's another great question, Matthew. I think it's very true that it did have a purpose, that you see this orientation to the east. You see, in fact, that's the way the tribes lined up in the desert, was pointing to the east, and that's the way the tabernacle was lined up, as compared to the pyramid, which was lined up pure north, absolutely perfectly north. So there is something to that. Do I know what it is? No idea. But there seems to be something to that. Now, any thoughts on the Urim and the Thummim? Now, I'll tell you, we talked about that. I talked about that in the show, and of course, trying to decipher the Urim and the Thummim. That's a real creative endeavor, because we know that the Urim has something to do with light, right? And so again, I have a blog on this, but it's been a while since I spent time with the Urim and the Thummim. But suffice it to say that they probably had a similar interface with this idea of this idea of the kind of electricity that was in the air at that time. Okay, there's the latest evidence. There are large quantities of water under the surface of the earth. Yeah, there is a ton of evidence showing that again, when you're taught, gee, the interior of the earth is magma with an iron ball in the middle. Well, this is a concept, that again came by rudimentary scientists. This is the extent of our understanding. Therefore, that's what it must be. But Scripture tells us that the firmament was created around the waters, separated the waters above from the waters below. Well, if you had a giant ball like this, there would be everything below that surface is below it, and everything above it is above it, right? It's like when Buckminster Fuller went to MIT and he asked all the engineers there, he said, which way is up? They all went like this, and he said, well, that's not true. That's out. That's not up. Okay. The ground being holy ground was this for the removal of footwear for the safety of the priest. Yes, Beck extra, right on, bingo. Take off your shoes, because we don't know what your shoes are. What are you going to generate? You generate one spark on top of this particular soil where the electricity is so great, you're dead. This whole thing is just kind of explaining a lot of stuff. Like the burning bush. Was the burning bush really just what he was seeing was some massive harboring of static electricity that was burning there? You've seen the pictures of the Tesla coil and so on, where you have this, static spark that's just, hovering there like this. Was this what he was calling, with describing as a burning bush, was actually more of a static display, an electric display of static electricity that was hovering there, through which Yah was communing, right? Yeah. And Debbie Johnson asked, could this also explain CERN better? What are your thoughts on this? Yeah. Well, CERN, they're looking for a particular kind of thing. And the mindset behind CERN is, we weren't really sure what we were going to get, but we experimented with nuclear technology. So we're not sure what we're going to get here. So let's just go down the path and let's just take assurances that everything's going to be okay. I think it's some of the most reckless scientific thinking you could possibly imagine. Okay, let's see. The clothes which had powers. Yeah, Debbie, if you're talking about the skins, those skins are discussed in the book of Jasher. Okay, 12 stone, 5 off, exquisite colors under laser light. Diamonds are black, dark, giving no light. Yeah, boom. So we have something that's going on there in common sense. It's common sense. There's something that's going on there that would have a reaction to give off some kind of light, because the ephod was giving off something. Okay, Sherry Slama says, we are the temple. Think of the implications when we are changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. We will see him as he is, because he will be like him. Yeah, amen. And again, the temple, this temple was built as a receiver. It was built as a receiver. And inside it was the ark, which was built as a capacitor. And this was done because Yah intended it to be this way. And so when you talk about Mashiach becoming the temple, he is that overwhelming energy that was Yah, and the completion and the reconciliation of man to heaven. Yeah, and so here we go. Interior earth is most likely water in its fourth state plasma. Yeah, thank you, Frank. Yeah, and that's probably because of the intense heat in the middle, which is probably a very small black hole. Okay. Dr. Bridget, what you would know called the third temple, was it only decorations, palm boughs, and wheat? No, I think that when we're talking about the third temple, we're talking about Mashiach. Mashiach was the third temple, built with stones without hand, right? An unblemished altar, an unblemished sacrifice. This was the third temple. And all this other stuff that's going to be built, this Masonic stuff, this idea of we're going to craft something out of stone. Well, that will be a third Hekal, but it will not be a Mishkan. It will not be. There never was a second Mishkan. There wasn't a third Mishkan. There won't be a third Mishkan. Okay, why did Moses make them drink the gold? I always thought of like dust, dirt of an unfaithful test. Yeah, I always thought that too. It's common sense. I always thought that too. And I don't know if that was the case. I think maybe he wanted to just see them levitate. I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. Okay. Maybe Yahusha is a particle accelerator. Well, I don't know about that, but I think that he probably has aspects of that. What about the water-soaked wood that Elijah called down? Yeah, again, when you're talking about wood, what came down and burned that wood? But some kind of high voltage event that just absolutely toasted, like maybe lightning, for instance. In Revelation 21:19, all of these stones were anisotropisia. That's a Greek word, huh? I don't have that, Debbie. I don't have that. Okay, we are the third temple because he lives in us. Amen. There it is, the test. All right. We should start wearing linen just in case we get caught up. Yeah, I do think that's exactly a very good idea. I think the more linen you can incorporate into your life, the better off you're going to be. I really do. Okay, guys. All right. And guys and gals, thank you so much for being with me tonight in this presentation. I want to thank you for joining another Sefer Academy production. And yeah, okay, the Antichrist and a Cup of Tea by Tim Cohen. Yeah, I can tell you when it comes to the Antichrist, I just have, I've got my own problems with the term Antichrist, the singular Antichrist. If you're talking about the man of lawlessness, if you're talking about the vile person, if you're talking about the little horn, if you're talking about the false prophet, who are you discussing, right? At some point, right? And so I prefer the more specifics of the scripture in dealing with who these people are and how they're rising. Okay, capacity, and make sure that it's explained for those who do not know circuit components and their properties. Well, Matthew, I'd love to sit down and deal with what a capacitor is, but I can't get into it now because I don't want to go into the rudiments of Ohm's law. I'm gonna leave it right there. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, all right. Okay, you guys. So thanks so much. Let's say a prayer here, and we'll call it a day. Heavenly Father, we give thanks for you bringing us together for Thursday night. Thank you, Father. I want to pray for all of those people at YouTube, Father, that and particularly the fact checkers and so on, when they review this video, that they would find it edifying and it would call out to them in particular, call to them by name, saying, you think that the world is all defined by AI, but actually Yahuah is the author, Yahuah is the creator, Yahuah is the maker. You know their name, you put them together in their mother's womb. You knew their name before the foundation of the earth, and that all of the events on the earth are within the scope of your control and not outside your control. Father, I pray that they would have eyes to see and ears to hear and be open to your word and to recognize that the foundation of all truth lies in you. Lies in you. It doesn't lie in a computer code. It doesn't lie in a software code. It doesn't lie in new technology, but it lies in your word, a word that was perfect before time began and maintains its perfection even now. Father, I also pray for all the subscribers here and all those who are in the chat room. Father, you would bless them and keep them. And particularly, I know Jessie is up way late now taking care of this. I want to thank her for that service, Father. If you bless her and her family and Shane and the kids and bring them a strong blessing on Britain as well, Father. We pray for open eyes now and open ears, that all of the leaders in the world would come to their senses and that you would bring them to their senses, Father, with a strong hand and a mighty arm outstretched over his people. Be blessed in us now, Father. May your name be praised and lift up among us. In Yahuah Sebaot Al Kadosh Echad Yasher Ba Hashem Yahushua HaMashiach. We thank you for this. Amen. Okay, guys, we'll see you next week.